marketing needs to be corporate and cannot be creative. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch-up with me, your host, Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. My basic beep Stanley Cup, my new one, my new edition, and this is really to keep my iced coffees on point. Okay, so the reason why this statement I believe is absolutely not true, I think there's a misconception that B2B marketing has to be corporate because it's business to business. So in that context, people only think it has to be corporate speaking to corporate, so you have to keep very professional and stiff and ugly, to be honest. I mean, one of the things that I find quite ironic is there's also like industry colours that people seem to go for when they're doing B2B marketing and advertising. For example, if you're in food, likely to use red. If you're in health or medical, likely to use blue. If you're in financial services, likely to use green. And it's all these things that people have like, oh, well, it's the colour theory around it. And it's that industry and we need to look smart and professional. That's really like, we'll go through why in more detail, but honestly, to be honest, I find this one of the most playful, let's call it an industry that you can do, because in terms of category, it's funny, isn't it? People talk about B2B as its own industry. It's just, I think people forget at the end of the day that B2B, there's still an end human actually seeing or reading the information about your product or service. So there's still a human that you are marketing to, regardless of what their job is. So first off, let's start off with acronyms. So acronyms for this is going to be quite easy. There's only going to be two. The first one is B2B, which is obviously business to business, and B2C, which is business to consumer. And so just to clarify what that means is B2B would be an example, and also examples of good creative marketing is Slack, Canva, Salesforce, HubSpot, Adobe, MailChimp. Those are all software and tools and things that you would use as a business for your business. And so that business is selling to you as a business user. Whereas business to consumer would be things like McDonald's, Nike, ASOS, Shein, all the things that you consume in your everyday life and doesn't really have any impact on your business. I say that, I'm sure people would say that they buy work clothes from Shein and so it has that impact. Okay, so this week we're going to go through 4 key takeaways to think about with B2B marketing and why and how it can be creative. I have to take a breath. Okay, number 1, we've covered this off before, but this is really your brand identity. So when you're thinking about your brand identity, and I think that, again, going back to the misconception about things needing to be corporate, this comes down to how your brand wants to be perceived. So if your brand wants to be perceived, as a corporate entity, and so they want to be stiff because that's your tone of voice, that's your style, that's how your CEO and your thought leaders are, then fine. But really, is that everyone's brand identity as a business? No, probably not. So again, when you're thinking about your voice, you're thinking about your physical tone that I'm speaking, but also your copywritten tone. So is your copywritten tone playful? Is it, do you use emojis? Do you use exclamation marks? Do you own the space? Are you a feminist company because actually you're trying to encourage more women to use your product as female entrepreneurs? Are you a non-profit? You really need to think about how that tone is. And again, we could cover this off in a whole other episode about tone of voice and how you define that. But your brand identity for your tone, and then also down to your color palettes, and not necessarily using the stereotypical industry color palettes, will help then kind of decide and influence the next parts of establishing your B2B marketing and creative. Okay, number 2 is your target audience. Now, this is different typically for B2B as opposed to B2C, because typically with B2B, you would have someone who would find out information about your product and service, and then you may have another person that is the decision maker. So it's likely that, say for example, if you're a marketing manager and you want to find a new piece of software to improve the performance and productivity of your job, you would then need to take that information about that product or service to the CFO for sign off, or the CEO for sign off. So there's 2 demographics that your company's product or service information needs to appeal to. So it needs to appeal to and provide information for the end user, that marketing manager, and then also for that CFO or CEO, which is, when you're coming down to B2B, a lot more, I suppose, grit. I think with B2B, people really want to get to like the what is, faster, quicker, like just lay it out for me. What am I getting as the benefits, and what's the impact, which kind of leads me into number 3 about the content, which is building trust and credibility. So with B2B marketing and creative, it is very likely that you need to have more credibility around your content. The space is kind of smaller to play in, and so it's almost easier. People say this is a direct competitor of this, especially if you're providing a software or a service. Even as an agency owner, people want to compare our digital agency to other digital agencies. I can get this service, what can you provide for that service? So they very much want to be able to compare it. And so with the trust and credibility, what really feeds into building that for you is reviews, case studies, credentials, that's your industry experience, the press around things that you may have had. And this is the part where I'm saying you can be so creative with, because what is a case study? Like, a case study doesn't have to be a boring case study for the same thing in every industry. You can make it so much more interactive. It could be a video, it could be an infographic. When we're talking about reviews, why does a review only have to be a Google review or a Facebook review? Why can't it be a video interview? Why can't it be sound bites? Why can't it be a Zoom call? Again, the reviews part, go into a whole nother episode about it. But yeah, this is where you then build on your target audience for those 2 demographics, your brand identity of how playful you are and what your tone is, to kind of execute this trust and credibility in your way of showcasing. I mean, there's obviously, with your credentials, there are credentials you would need to link to certain governing boards or websites or whatever. Which kind of, all of this leads back into number 4. Number 4 being long-term. So there's a long-term customer journey here that you need to think about. Again, this differentiates from B2B marketing versus B2C marketing. Is B2B marketing, like when I was talking about the target audience having 2 different key target audience people, very likely, unless it's a small business and they can just make a decision there and then to opt in or buy, that customer journey could be months. I mean, like, on average, we're talking probably like 6 to 12 months, because you have to think about people wanting to review information, comparing to competitors. They may need to go for approval. They may come back and ask you some further questions because of a sign-off process that they have. Then you may have demos. You may have, a free trial period, all of that. So you have to think about that customer journey that you're going to go through is going to be a lot longer from a B2C perspective. The benefit of that is that once you kind of got them engaged, it should be easier to retain them, because then you should know and understand their business and their sign-off process and their life cycle. So when does their budgets come out for an annual renewal, or how do they upgrade, or how do you know what's happening in their industry that you can help with, like bolt-ons that they need. So yeah, I think that's everything kind of covered off in a nutshell. But to reiterate, B2B marketing can be creative, should be creative, and oh my goodness, as I mentioned earlier, the examples, and I will link them in the show notes, but if you really, really want to see creative in the B2B space, think of Slack, think of Canva, think of MailChimp. They are epic and they are doing great things. But Thank you for joining me for another week of Engage and Thrive with your host Taelon, and hope you enjoyed this week's coffee catch-up. See you next week.